We are live, Mike. Episode 2 of Talking Big Four Hoops. I'm Johnathan Snyder, joined alongside my man Mike Bundt. Thank you for those who had some patience with us. Little audio issues on my end, but we are here talking Big Four Hoops. And Mike, we're a week into the season, and we're a little confused. I think that's the word we're going to use to talk about these local teams this year. But we have to start. Let's just dive right in. No, let's not dilly dally around. Canisius stunning St. Bonaventure on Saturday inside the Kessler Center, 84-80 in overtime. Every St. Bonaventure alum fan I've talked to, not very happy. What are your takeaways from that game?
My takeaways is that it's going to take quite a while for this St. Bonaventure team to get things going. It's a great win for Canisius. Obviously, anytime the Griffs take down St. Bonaventure, historic Little Three rivalry, it's great for Canisius. But this Bona team has a lot of work left to do. I am encouraged by the young forwards that they have, but their guards who came in highly touted. Daryl Banks III from St. Peter's, and then they have the transfer from Holy Cross.
Luke.
Yep, really just did not get it done in that game, combining to shoot 10 of 29 from the field. They both are talented. They're going to score a lot of points, but they have a lot of work to do. And you never give up on a Mark Schmidt team, but it's a disappointing loss early in the season for them.
Yeah, Mike, one thing I was really surprised at, the line was only 6.5 going into that game. To think that Bona was a 13-point favorite just a few days earlier at home, they go down the road, play Canisius, they're only 6.5-point favorites. We've talked a little bit about how down we are on Canisius this year, and just moving forward. That to me was just absolutely stunning. I think that there's a lot. I saw a narrative going on social media about how when you have these rivalry games, Big Four games, that they're basically toss-ups no matter how good a team is, how bad a team is. And that's the 170th time those two teams have played, and it's only the 8th time that it's been played in the Kessler Center. So I think all bets were off going into that game, and I think Canisius just showed that these rivalry games, they just bring out the best and sometimes the worst in these teams, and it's a toss-up. It's a toss-up game, and that's exactly what it was. It was an overtime game. You mentioned Banks; he scored 22, pretty ineffective. I mean Henderson. Jordan Henderson, a great game for Canisius, 19 points. Jakob Fritz had 12. So, but Luke had a good stat line: 13 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds. But you talked about the 10 of 29 shooting, and just if there's an ineffective way to go 13, 9, and 6, I think they did it. I don't know what to think of this, Mike. I don't know if it's an overreaction, panic type. What is Mark Schmidt doing? Is this team not as good? Is 7th too high in the A10? I don't think it's that, because I do think these rivalry games are tough. I think you see it at all levels in all sports when these teams get together. You have even high-level college basketball, college football, Division I at the absolute highest level. You see Alabama get upset by unranked SEC teams. You see Kentucky Wildcats in basketball may lose to a lower level SEC opponent because it's just a rivalry game. So I wouldn't hit the panic button, but it's definitely cause for concern.
Yeah, and one of the things that we saw once again in this game, and we saw this a lot in recent years with St. Bonaventure, is really the unwillingness of them to get a bench really heavily involved in the action. They tried to get their bench involved, but it seems with Bona, it's always 5 to 7 players every year. We'll see how it works out, but I was hoping that when you have a guy like Daryl Banks, that he would just be able to dominate this Canisius squad, having come from St. Peter's, which made that run in the NCAA tournament last year. And it's going to happen. Bona lost to Canisius, I believe, 3 years ago at the Kessler Center, and that was when they had a lot of quality players on that team. So it's not like Canisius can't lose to can't beat St. Bonaventure. Hell, the Griffs gave St. Bonaventure a great game last year at the Riley Center where they were leading late in the second half, and that was against a Bonnet team that went to the NIT Final Four. So it's not that it can't happen. It's just I think with the Bonnies at this point, where they've been an A-10 contender for close to a decade right now, you just don't expect those performances going up against Canisius, even with a brand new squad full of newcomers. But in the end, as you said, credit to Canisius. Henderson had himself a great game. Jordan Henderson getting 19 points, 6 assists. He was all over the place. Xavier Long, 19 points. Todd Savesky, 11 points, made some free throws late, 4 assists.
MAC Rookie of the Week, too.
And then Jameer Moultrie, he put up some ugly shots at times, but finished with 10 points. And Jaco Fritz with the 12 points. So these are games that over the course of the season are going to be memorable for Canisius, because I don't see this team being a 15 to 21 team. If anything, maybe they'll hover 10 to 13 wins this season, maybe a little bit better if they surprise. But I don't think they beat a great St. Bonnet team at the moment. This Bonnet team is going to get much better by the end of the year. They are going to be very competitive, but at this point, it's mostly youngsters, and you just go through. Just going through the box score right now. I wish we could pop up these stats on the screen, but going through some of the Bonnies guys, besides Kyrell Luke and Daryl Banks, who we already mentioned, combined for 35 points on the 10 of 29 shooting. And Luke did have 9 assists, so credit to him for distributing the ball. But Anwar Maluk had 13 points. Barry Evans, 8 points, 5 rebounds. Jan Farrell, a highly touted recruit, 5 points, 4 rebounds. Chad Venning, 11 points, 4 boards. So these forwards are going to be good for St. Bonaventure. They're young, they have size, they have height, but forward is the one position where it normally takes you a little bit longer in the college game to really get adjusted and play at that high level. So it's one of those things where 2-3 years from now, those guys probably dominate Canisius head to head. But at this point, they're basically guys coming fresh out of high school and in prep school and stuff like that. They didn't have the best performance. And even so, it looked like they were going to win the game late. Bonnet had about a 5-point lead heading into the final minutes, and Canisius they got hot and they made some plays. And when this game eventually did go to overtime, the Griffs were able to pull away in the end.
Well, you brought up something I want to dive into a little bit more, and that's from the Bonnet side. You talked about the inability to kind of develop a bench. Well, 4 numbers are kind of alarming to me. There was already a lot of – this team brought back 0.3 points, Mike, from last year's squad. So nobody was back, okay? And you take a look at the minutes played. So out of 45 minutes, Kyrell Luke plays 43. Daryl Banks plays 39. Barry Evans plays 38. And Anquan Hill plays 35. That seems like Syracuse to me. That's the Jim Boeheim method. Six-man rotation. I don't think that gets it done at the A-10 level. And you saw this last year when Canisius beat UB at the arena downtown in a game that they had no business being in. And for all intents and purposes, outplayed UB for almost all 40 minutes last year. So this wasn't ultra surprising to me, but I did expect a little bit more out of Bonnet. And if you're a Bonnet fan, I think you're disappointed. You might be even a little worried. And if you're a Canisius fan, I still think you probably aren't, buying your MAC championship front row tickets yet. But at the same time, I think you're happy, but you're cautiously optimistic. I think that's really what it comes down to, because I don't know if, if you take a look at Canisius' schedule coming up, they should win the next 2. Cleveland State opened the season with the loss to Division II Notre Dame, and then they play Fredonia, Division III school down the 90s. So Canisius should be 3-1 by the end of this week, and we might be talking a little bit differently about them. But some tough games following, at Cornell, at Buffalo, at Siena, at Iona, at Toledo,
I don't want to give Cleveland State to Canisius yet. I know Cleveland State is down this year. They actually just played my Ohio Bobcats, and loss down in Athens. But Cleveland State is a team that can definitely give Canisius issues. This Scripps team just lost to Youngstown State in their opener. Fredonia, like you said, that should be an easy win. Then you have Cornell. Ideally, if you're Canisius, you do get a strong performances in your next couple games, and you can jump out to a better than anticipated start to their season. Another thing that we do want to address from St. Bonaventure, they did open with a win over St. Francis in the first game of the year. That was a 71-58 victory. And in that game, talking about how Luke struggled against Canisius, well, against St. Francis, he went for 23 points and 5 assists with 7-14 shooting. You're not going to get that every night, but that's definitely something that was encouraging. And Barry Evans, 12 points, 8 rebounds. I think at this stage of the year with St. Bonaventure, their keys to winning are going to be developing the young guys, but in the meantime, having them play strong in the boards and try to avoid foul trouble on a nightly basis, because foul trouble is one of the biggest concerns when you have young forwards that are inexperienced. I think at this point, just tell them, be aggressive, get your boards, get your easy chances down low, and then you're hoping Kyrell Luke is going to be that playmaker. You're hoping that Daryl Banks is going to have more good nights than bad. And Barry Evans, I'm telling you, he is going to be the next probably star big on the Bonnies. You're talking about a freshman that is already a double-digit scoring potential who brings down the boards. And Jan Furl, that doesn't even talk about Jan Furl, who is a little bit shorter than Barry Evans, but was considered a top 150 recruit by some services out of high school and was a late signee for the Bonnies. So there are some really good pieces there. It's just really difficult when you have basically 100% roster turnover and you lose all of the guys that they lost with Kyle Lofton, Dom Welch, Osuno Shuni'i, and so forth, with Jalen English and
Attaway.
Jalen Attaway and Jaron Holmes. I'm sorry. I'm combining his old last name with other things. So, but there's simply no replacing that. So it's going to take time, but they have the pieces there, and time is going to be, it's going to work out. And you look at the schedule they have coming up, there's going to be some tough games. Next up, it's South Dakota State Tuesday night in Sioux Falls. That is not an easy place to play, and South Dakota State isn't going to be happy after losing to Akron earlier in their season. You got Bowling Green after them. That could go either way. Southern Indiana, that should be a win. And then you got a stretch where you're playing Notre Dame, Middle Tennessee, Buffalo, Cleveland State, Iona. It's not the most difficult non-conference schedule. There's wins to be had. But if the Canisius game was anything to foreshadow, nothing is going to come easy to this Bonnie squad in non-conference play.
No, and I think the biggest takeaway from this, Mike, is the fact that neither team, I think, should be too high or vice versa too low. I think Canisius should be happy. They should celebrate this win. But I do think it was an emotionally driven win. I think Bana should be disappointed in their effort, but this isn't an at-large team. This is a team that, as much as I don't agree with the whole, you need to lose games to figure it out later, and losses are good. I don't think any losses are good. I do think that if there was a loss to look at and say, I never want to feel this way again, losing to let's just be honest, an inferior opponent from just an athlete standpoint. I think Bana can build on that. I think it wouldn't shock me. I don't think it would shock you if they ran off the next three. If they picked up a win in Sioux Falls and picked up 2 home wins against Bowling Green and Southern Indiana, and went into the Notre Dame game 3-1. That wouldn't shock me.
You never know with this Bana team. And like we said before the year, probably around 17, 18 wins is what the hope is this season. Give or take a few. If they come together quicker than anticipated, maybe they can get to 20. If it's a tough non-conference, maybe they're a little bit short. Maybe they're 14, 15 wins. But one thing that was an interesting topic I do want to talk about before we transition to UB is that I saw a post mentioning how Bana should stop playing on-site campus games against teams like Canisius and Niagara. Obviously, they've stopped playing recently against Niagara. And Mike Harrington of the Buffalo News was in total disagreement, and he made it known on Twitter, and a few other people stood up for these Big Four rivalry games. And I personally see both sides of the conversation. These games have tremendous historical significance when it comes to the Western New York basketball scene. Going back to the Little Three when they would play these games at the Odd. And for the old-time basketball fans in Buffalo, they still matter. It doesn't have the same significance that it used to have, obviously, but they still matter to many people. And while they've fallen out of the big, significant sports scene in Western New York, where the Bills and the Sabres dominate the headlines, I still enjoy these contests. It's one of the few games each year where you see fans at Canisius really coming out to support the team. It's an incredible environment. And it's a game that Canisius treats like their Super Bowl. But from the other side of the spectrum, I understand why Bonnie's fans why some might not want to play these games anymore, because I don't think there is any real incentive for St. Bonaventure to come up to Buffalo, play at Canisius, and potentially lose. It doesn't help their metrics, because if you win, it's a game that they're expected to win, and you're playing a team that's most years going to be in the bottom 100 of the net rankings or RPI, whatever metric you want to use. And if you lose, you're really hurting your metrics. And the fact about it is not enough people. Well, I did say the old timers care. Not enough of the younger fans do care enough. And you're seeing a lot of these power conference teams and bigger conference schools dropping traditional local historic rivalries because they don't benefit them. And I would hate for Bonaventure to kind of shrug off Canisius as this ain't worth it. But if it only hurts them in the metrics, there really is an argument for them to stop playing these games.
Yeah, and I think that it gets back to a little bit of the bigger picture about the word I would try to say is disparity, I think, amongst, college athletics, where you talked about there's no incentive to play Canisius at their gym. As much as might be correct, that's frustrating if you're a small school like Canisius. You have 3 teams in your backyard, all Division I, and 2 of them, like UB and Bana, might not want to play them because it doesn't help them. And so I can understand what Mike Harrington's saying. The historical significance aside, okay, the biggest difference we're talking about here is Bana going to Canisius. I don't think anybody, and I saw that Twitter account today, the Bana alum, who does a fantastic job, by the way. Let's point that out of their coverage of the Bonnies. Just a spectacular job. If you're a fan of the Bonnies and don't follow that SB Unfurled account, I don't know what you're waiting for. They do a fantastic job, but I saw, them say, well, we don't really want to play them in our gym either. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing. We don't want to play them in our gym either. It's just, we shouldn't play them at all because they, like I said, it's an emotional filled game. Not always the best team wins, but at the same time, you see teams like Bana bring in cupcakes all the time. Whether it be, you got UB who's bringing in St. John Fisher this year and SUNY Canton. I mean, for all intents and purposes, a UB team that just got blown out the other day is probably going to win that game by 50 or 60 or 70.
Well, the difference being those are non-D1 opponents that don't impact the net. So it's a bye game that you're assuming is going to be an easy blowout victory where you can get your bottom guys some minutes and also get your bench to play on the court. St. Bonaventure going to Canisius, it can hurt you, and most likely only will hurt you.
And I saw Mike Harrington say, well, just win the game, right? He has a point.
Harder than
exactly. It is so much harder, and there's so much more that goes into it. This isn't just the Bills going on the road against the Jeff Saturday coached Colts, and you lose, and you say, well, just win the game. Okay, you're right. Just win the game. No excuses. This is a little bit differently. Mike, as well as I do. I talk all the time. The athletes are the same. I mean, these are Division I athletes. whether they're at Canisius, St. Bonaventure, UB Niagara, they're all very good athletes. So if you put them on a court for 40 minutes, the similar type athletes going at it, the team that's not as good could win, and not just 1 out of 10, they could win 4 out of 10.
And especially early in the non-conference now with
Correct.
what that has happened to the transfer portal. These teams are almost completely brand new each year, minus a few players, maybe less so at a Canisius or St. Bonaventure based on recent years where they were able to keep their team together. But after last year, look at the Bono roster. It's all brand new faces, and they've had a couple months to really try to get chemistry with one another. And you add in the fact that you got a bunch of youngsters that haven't played any college basketball before. And it's a tougher challenge for St. Bonaventure than people may want it to come across. And the one thing that Mike Harrington said that I do agree with is this is a game for the alumni in the Buffalo area to be able to come out and see St. Bonaventure.
I agree.
And
you mentioned a great point earlier. This is one of the few times that Canisius rocks the Kessler Center. Fans from both teams are there. It's an exciting atmosphere. I mean, it's great for local college basketball. It's fantastic.
I saw a counterpoint, and it's a point that I truly do agree. It's never going to happen, but it's amazing that we haven't gotten to the point where there's a Big Four doubleheader at the arena. It's never going to happen, but like I can almost understand more having St. Bonaventure come out to downtown to maybe play Canisius. If you pair UB against a Power 5 opponent, or you have Bonaventure take on a Power 5 opponent, and you have UB Canisius or Canisius Niagara or something paired with another big game. But I understand Canisius knows they don't have the draw, and they want to have that nice small environment really packed in and giving it some noise. But if you're Bona, you're really thinking at this point, we'd rather just play a game in a bigger arena and have more of a draw and make it a special event rather than play at Canisius and Niagara going forward. And, it's different when Bona plays UB. And the difference being, while UB is far from any world beater, UB is consistently good enough on a year-to-year basis, maybe not this year, but they're consistently good enough most years to the point where they will not hurt St. Bonaventure if they beat them. Yes, it won't be a great loss for St. Bonaventure. And most of the time, honestly, St. Bonaventure does take care of business against UB outside of the Nate Oates years. But UB is going to be a team with metrics typically anywhere between 70th to 120th in the country. You lose on the road to a team right there, not the end of the world. You don't want to be losing this minus sub 250 teams.
Yeah.
And then that's where the argument really hurts them. And UB, if they had the ambition to really improve their basketball, they probably could be a consistent top 80, top 75, top 85.
Well, yeah, we saw that. We saw that,
and they had it, and they let it go away. But we've talked a lot about St. Bona right now. We've talked about Canisius. Obviously, we'll go more in depth with Canisius throughout the season. I know we are encouraged by some of their guys, but they still have some proving to do to us. But the number 2 story, John, we'll talk about that James Madison game. UB open with a win over Colgate. Not Colgate. My brain's farting right now. UB open the season. It was Colgate. 88-87.
Colgate.
I'm not thinking right now. I'm sorry about that, John. But an impressive win over Colgate to open the year. But then all of that goodwill thrown away on Saturday afternoon in just a demolition at Alumni Arena.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's tough, Mike. We kind of knew that these types of games were possible with this UB squad. I think we were encouraged enough by the Colgate win, at least I was, that they would be a little bit better than I thought. And with time, I think that they were going to be pretty solid, a contender in the MAC, not by no means the favorite. This game, unfortunately, was just an utter disaster from nearly 5 minutes in till the end of the game. They just didn't look very good, Mike. They didn't shoot it well. They didn't play well. Their body language wasn't good. They didn't run sets well. They didn't execute. I mean, whatever you can say, you could say. Only thing I won't question is the effort, but I'll question everything else. The shot selection was poor. I mean, I felt like I was watching a little bit of a run at the Knights of Columbus sometimes with quick transition threes in 4 seconds. Shots that just didn't look good either. That didn't look like they were going to go in the basket. They never had a chance to go in. I was very discouraged. I left the Colgate game with a couple really good notes. Zid Powell played well. Played really well. But I also left that thinking, wow, Devin Caesar's a real good player that can come off the bench and probably going to start by the end of the year. I came off saying, a couple of these other guys, Armani Foster could be a contributor and someone that plays solid defense, going to get a bunch of steals, going to help them get out in transition. I left this game very confused about what to think about this team. And I'm a little on the opposite, where I said Canisius and Bundt don't need to go as far the other way. If I'm UB, I'm panicking. If I'm a fan, I'm panicking. Do I think they can get better? Do I think they're going to win games? Sure, I do. But look at their upcoming schedule, Mike. UConn on the road, ranked 25 this week. Then you go to Virgin Islands, you start with Drake. You don't know who you're going to play, but it's most likely going to be 2 more good teams that week. You are not playing Cleveland State, Youngstown State next, where you could figure this out on the fly. There is no figuring this out on the fly. And quite honestly, Mike, some of these guys coming in are transfers, are juniors and seniors and grad students anyways. You didn't have time to figure it out on the fly to start. From what I saw through 2 games, they don't have an identity yet. And I'm not sure where that identity is going to come from and what it's going to look like. But I am disappointed, and the alarm bells are starting to go off if I'm a UB fan.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. I was happy that they were able to open the year with the win over Colgate. That was a solid win. Colgate has had success in recent years. I believe in the Patriot League, having gone to the NCAA tournament. I think they've won 3 of the last 3 Patriot League tournaments. So
Conference Player of the Year too on their team.
Actually, there was a guy I covered in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Jack Ferguson, who's been a prominent player on that Colgate team in recent years, recently graduated. So I was happy about that. It was far from perfect, but they had a lot of encouraging signs. You mentioned Zid Powell. He was fantastic. Caesar, a youngster, was playing aggressive, making a lot of great plays at the hoop. But everything good about their win over Colgate on Monday was erased over the last 40 minutes.
Nobody even remembers the win against Colgate.
Yeah, and it's a shame because the James Madison game was just left a brutal taste in everyone's mouths. Losing by 35 at home, like we haven't seen losses like that since the Reggie days, and it's where do you go from here? Yep. The Bulls' schedule is brutal. So your next game, as you mentioned, 25th ranked UConn. Like that doesn't make anything easier. That's just another difficult game on the schedule. Then you're playing a Missouri Valley team in Drake. You have Canisius team that they lost to last year while they had their quality players. You got St. Bonaventure, West Virginia, Michigan State. Oh, God. I know I said in last week's show that I thought they could potentially be an 18-win team. And I still think if some things go right, maybe they could. I might want to revise that and put it closer to 15 wins because this non-conference is going to be very difficult for them. And even MAC play might be pretty difficult. I know they were picked 6, but you're going to be depending on a lot of guys to step up. And just looking at the box score against James Madison, I know this isn't pretty. Only one player in double digits, Curtis Jones, 4 of 12. He scored 13 points, 6 rebounds, but it had 3 turnovers. Isaiah Adams, the much touted transfer from Central Florida, had 6 turnovers. That is just unacceptable. Zid Powell, who had a strong game against Colgate, 8 points on 1 of 7 shooting. Armani Foster, who's the big D2 transfer, had a total of 2 points. On the day. UB was 18 of 56. They were 4 of 22 from 3. they're veterans like a LaQuille Carnett. You'd think by this point he would be a prominent player in the MAC, having transferred to UB from Cincinnati. He looks worse now than what he did when he came to UB. And these youngsters, Zakir Williamson, Isaac Jack, they're not there yet. And some of the transfers that were expected to come in and be impact players are struggling. Control Blocker, probably the most time he's gotten and looked okay, but I don't know. They just don't have the guy.
I just didn't see a team, Mike, that had when you bring in this many transfers and different guys, right? The patience level has to be high. Okay, but at the same time, you're bringing in guys that have played. Some are older. You're not bringing in 10, 18-year-old kids from high school. You're bringing in grown men for, 20, 21-year-old men that have played multiple years. That time to gel that an 18-year-old squad would have is just not there because you don't have the time. There's no rebuilding year. This is a year where you were expected, if I'm not mistaken, Foster, this is his graduate year. So this is a one and done for him. So if UB was willing to bring him in, you have to imagine that they expect him to be an impact player, whether that be offensively, defensively. They expect him to be an impact player. My first note, Mike, of this game is LaQuille Hartnett being scoreless. I'm high on him. I've been high on him, but
might be time to change that.
I mean, coming off the bench, not playing I thought for sure he'd be a starter to start the year. He's not. Coming off the bench, having virtually no impact in the game. They allowed JMU to shoot 52%. Combine that with 32% shooting, the game was over 10 minutes in. I'm not gonna sit here and bash them completely. It's very early. They have to show some resiliency tomorrow night against UConn. Even if they lose, which is probably the most likely outcome, they have to show some resiliency. They hop on that plane, go to Virgin Islands. Again, they have to show something. If they go put up a fight against UConn and they go down to Virgin Islands and take two or take one, but show that they can play and fight and battle, I think the panic button goes away because you do after that, you get Canisius. You get
Why did White put this schedule together like this?
Yeah, well, you take a look at, I believe the Michigan State game was a late add. Sometime in like late October, that game got added. And it got added because they had a big gap in the schedule before conference play.
This is a schedule that you put together if you think you can compete for an at-large berth. And we know that they're anything but. So
this is what Nate Oates puts together.
It's confusing. This is the opposite of what I expected, the opposite of what I wanted. It's okay if you want some bye games or you want some games to challenge your squad and help them with growth and development. This seems like a schedule that is going to beat the living crap out of them. And I don't like that when you have some young players trying to figure themselves out and newcomers that clearly are not up to the task. And I don't see how this is going to benefit. It's one thing when you're Akron, Kent State, and you're recruiting at a high level and you have transfers that are coming in from high-level JUCOs and other programs where you feel like they can compete against the higher-level competition. It's a different thing when you're Jim Weitzel. You've had 3 disappointing years in a row, if we're being honest, with high-level talent. A 4-star guy in Johnathan Williams, a high 3-star guy in Rondo Segu, a Texas Tech transfer in Josh Mbala, and you couldn't get done with them.
Yeah.
And what do? You replace those guys with Isaiah Adams out of Central Florida, who has not gotten off to a good start. You replace them with a D2 scorer, Armani Foster, and a JUCO and Zid Powell. And this is the schedule you put together. That does not make sense. And, we've been critical of Jim for a couple years now. And my peer, Kevin Masseri, has talked about believing he should be fired. At the end of the year, if this UB team wins 10 or less games, I think they'll get to the 10 wins. But if they win less than 10 games, he absolutely deserves to go because he inherited a program that had everything going for it. And now it appears all that momentum has been stalled and they're going in the opposite direction. And when you have schools like Kent State, Akron, Toledo, Ohio, and even Ball State right now with some momentum, that's unacceptable.
And I think some of the people that might watch this and say, "Well, you guys are overreacting. It's one loss." I don't think we'd have the same reaction had it been, say, an 87-80 game or 79-75 loss. I don't think we'd have the reaction. They got blown out on their home floor by a team that was no better than them.
Picked fourth in the Sun Belt.
Skill position wise.
Come on.
They're not getting blown out by West Virginia. They weren't getting blown out by Michigan State or UConn. They got blown out by a team that was no better than they were. Wasn't worse, but was no better. And they got blown out at home. And I think that's the biggest thing. Now, I will say I'm a fan of the schedule they put together because I'm always a fan of a team that's willing to play whoever, whenever, wherever. And the fact that they're going to UConn, they're going to West Virginia, they're going to Michigan State, they're going to Virgin Islands for 3 neutral floor games. They're going to a neutral floor, I believe, in Atlanta to play Tulane. I'm a big fan of that. Now, it says another thing that they probably struggled to get home games. 2 of their home games are by non-division.
They couldn't get home games last year. Their best games, Western Kentucky on the road, North Texas on the road.
I mean, Bonner is probably their best home game this year.
I get it. It's tough scheduling games as a mid-major school, but it's something where it's sad seeing where this program is going. And then obviously with FLJ leaving the women's program, they opened their season losing to Canisius. And you know what? You can't even get mad at them because they only have one player returning and everybody left. So at some point, UB is going to have a discussion about, like I said, Jim
crossroads right now.
And they'll never have this discussion, but I truly believe they need to have a discussion about the future of Mark Allnut as the athletic director, because I think there has been multiple failures by him with the way UB has been run in recent years. You can go and discuss recent hires at coaching spots, and I do think I do have some confidence in Coach Mo Linguist and his recruiting abilities, but I am concerned about how they prioritize football despite no real benefit from it. And attendance in football has been horrible. Basketball was selling out with Nate Oates in his final year.
Yeah.
Now they struggle to get 1,500 to 2,000 people at the games. The momentum is stalled, and it's a shame because I thought UB had the potential to build something. And I know for a fact when Nate Oates left, before he left, there was donors to UB that were willing to raise more money in an attempt to try to keep him. Now, it wouldn't have kept him. He would have left anyway. But there was people willing to raise more money to make a more serious offer than what they did when they originally signed him to his contract extension. And they were basically just ignored. And then the money that UB did get, they didn't put it towards the coaching. They did a search and they settled on Weitzel and gave him one of the cheapest contracts in the MAC. So it's a shame, but UB is in this position because of the way the SUNY system is run and the incompetent approach that the school has for D1 athletics.
Yeah.
So.
Well, listen, by this time next week, when we talk again, they'll have played 3 more games. So let's hope we're having a little bit of a different discussion. I'm hoping for a battle tomorrow night with UConn on CBS Sports Network. Let's make it interesting.
Hey, they beat UConn. We're changing everything, but if they're losing to James Madison by 35, I'm going to have to set the line for UConn at probably 25 points minimum.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that line is tomorrow. I haven't taken a look at it yet, but I got to think that it's got to be closer to 20. With that being said, Mike, let's transition into our last 2 topics. We won't spend a ton of time on these as we're nearing the end of our time here. But we won't spend a whole lot of time on Niagara, and I apologize to our Niagara fans and any alumni. But Didn't catch a whole lot of Niagara in their first 2 games, but they kind of expected how we started how we expected. A pretty non-competitive loss to Maryland and a pretty non-competitive loss to Bucknell. 2 pretty good programs. I guess what was really disappointing, they didn't average 50 points in those 2 games. One guy's in double figures, Braxton Bayless. They go to Dublin, Ireland now for 2 neutral floor games. They come back and play Deauville. So I don't know how
At
much
least
really
there's
going
a win on the schedule.
Yeah, we really don't know we don't know what we have in them yet, and I don't think I would do it justice by making assumptions off of some box scores and maybe some small clips. So I think it's yet to be seen what this team's all about. I think we kind of knew they were going to struggle to start. I don't think that was anything unexpected. But I would say one thing that would be cause for concern is, like I said, they're averaging 49.5 points a game, and they've shot just 39% from the floor through 2 games. If you can't score, you can't win. The only team that can do that is Virginia, and Niagara's not Virginia. And Greg Paulson and Tony Bennett.
In the MAC, you got to score,
Yeah,
especially when you're
exactly.
going up against fast tempo teams like Iona that can really light it up.
Yeah.
And such a
Canisius put up 84 against Bonner. So
yeah, and Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference there's so many quick young guards that have speed that can drill shots from deep. A lot of times the reason they're in the MAC and not some other conferences, maybe they didn't have the overall awareness or they were a late bloomer and their ability came in a later time. But Niagara is definitely struggling offensively right now. Their 3-point shooting was not good against Bucknell, 8 of 24, which is, I mean, it's okay. It's not
33%.
It's not bad, not horrible. But Aaron Gray was 2 of 10 from the field, so you had one player going 2 of 10. That's not going to get it done. And like you said, we don't want to be too hard on them. They did lose Marcus Hammond, who was a huge chunk to their offense, and Greg Kwakamensa.
Well, it's funny, Mike, because I think what we're talking about here is just kind of the expectations that we hold to like UB and St. Bona that we don't necessarily hold Canisius and Niagara to. And I think that should go as a compliment to UB and Bona and what they've built over the last, let's call it 10 years, right? The last decade. The expectations are different, right? So we're over here kind of baby in Niagara, right? Well, they played Maryland and they played Bucknell and that's fine. But then we're over here, crushing Bona for an overtime loss at a rival, and we're crushing UB because of a blowout loss. I think that's a compliment to what those 2 schools have built.
And it's about the tier system that's developed in college sports, especially D1 sports. You got the Power 5, and in basketball, you add the Big East to that. You can add the A10 and some of the other better power conferences that are out there. The American is obviously a power conference when it comes to D1 basketball. And at this point, you might even count the WCC with Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and some of the up-and-comers up in that conference. But so Bonaventure, they're not in like the top tier basketball, but they can compete with the top tier.
Absolutely.
So when they lose to a Canisius, you get frustrated because you're like, you know what, these guys should just built a top 25 overall team in the last couple of years. Then you got that next group of people where the UBs of the world, the top mid-majors, where you expect to be in that mid-major top 25 poll every year and competing. Beyond that, you get the more, not the middle mid-majors, where you got teams like Bowling Green or Western Michigan, where they're normally pretty competitive, but they're never going to be competing at the top of the mid-majors. Every once in a while they can. And then beneath that, you have everyone else. And that's where you got the Canisius and the Niagaras of the world, where they really don't put much money to be competitive. It's more they're just happy to field the team at the same level as everyone else. So there was a time a decade and a half ago in the early 2000s where Niagara was consistently very good. But that's because they had a tremendous head coach in Joe Mahalik, who was a cheat code. He was great at Hofstra too. And you lose a guy like that, and then you see how difficult it is for a low-level D1 school to win when they lack resources, struggle to bring in recruits. Because you think about it, when it comes to going to a Niagara or a Canisius, you're recruiting school players to go to a school with a 2,000 seat gym in a cold part of the country that doesn't have a recent history of winning, and you have limited recruiting budgets. It's hard. You don't have the huge, and you don't have NIL ability to really pay players, and you don't have the crazy social media teams to really throw glitzy things and try to attract them that way. It's a little bit different with St. Bonaventure and UB.
Yeah.
And we'll close this out very soon. But St. Bonaventure has their conference that they can recruit on. They can say you can play against some of the best teams in the country. You can get noticed. You can go to the NBA one day. Yeah, you're going to come into the middle of nowhere in Olean, New York, but we have one of the best coaches in all of America. UB has flashy social media stuff. They have flashy things, and that's what Nate Oates was really dialed into, and Brian Hodgson. Obviously, some of that's gone away with Jim Weitzel, but it's really tough for Niagara and
Yeah.
Canisius, and
Yeah.
that's really not going to ever change.
Yeah. I would agree. And like I said, it'll be interesting. I just need a bigger sample size right now with all these teams, quite honestly, Mike. We need a bigger sample size with everybody. But like I said, I think we kind of knew more what we had with UB and Bana, even though we didn't know what we had. It was one of those things where we didn't know a lot of guys, but we knew what we had, kind of thing. The expectations were still high. With Canisius and Niagara, we didn't know what we had, and we still don't know what we have. So, let's see where we stand next week. All these teams are expected to play multiple times between now and next Monday. But I do want to close out part of what I want to do on this site this year, Mike. I do want to cover a little bit of the smaller schools in Buffalo. Not everybody, obviously, we can't get to everybody, but I was fortunate enough to see Daemen live this past weekend as they opened their season, hosting the East Coast East Coast Challenge, East Region Challenge inside their gym on Friday and Saturday. And surprisingly enough, they started 2-0 and looked pretty good in the process. And you're talking about a team that lost Andrew Cisco, the best big man in Western New York at any level over the past 5 years. And I had this conversation with their associate athletic director, and he used the word, one of the best Division II college basketball players ever. It's not a far-fetched statement to make. So with him gone, Kyle Harris, the local park product gone, as well as Sean Fasioro, they were able to defeat Georgian Court and St. Anselm, who is a constant East Region power. Daemen actually ranked fourth today in the East Region poll, which was really impressive for a team, Mike, that's just filled with local guys. Justin Glover from St. Joe's averaged 10 over the weekend. Justin Hemphill from Cardinal O'Hara was impressive. Justin Johnson from West Seneca. Tyler Hind from Randolph didn't play very well, but he's a member of the squad. Nick McDonald, Mike's son, head coach Mike McDonald's son, averaged 16.5 for the weekend. So very impressive start. They played UB very competitive to open the season in an exhibition. Mike, I know you don't know a ton about them as much as you do these other four schools, but I think overall there's things to be excited for at Daemen too right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daemen has played their way into the Buffalo basketball conversation. Obviously, they're not as prominent as the rest of the local teams, but having been NAIA less than a decade ago to rising to D2 ranks and having the success that they've had under Mike McDonald has been really impressive. And I know you were part of that journey in their rise from NAIA to D2. So I'm happy for them over there because you know what? It's not an easy transition, and it's not easy to get attention in a market that is so focused on Bill Sabres and St. Bona and UB. And Daemen is really stepping up.
Yeah. And I just do want to close out, touch on my Bryant and Stratton Buffalo Bobcats. One of my best friends, Damone Brown, doing a heck of a job over there. 2-0 to start their season as well. They will play actually at Notre Dame College in Ohio on Wednesday, the team that upset Cleveland State last
year. Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Wow.
Yeah, so that's going to be on Wednesday at 7:30. And I'll tell you what, the Bobcats got a good team, some new guys, some returning guys, but they got a player, Mike, DJ Little, senior guard out of Charlotte, was a midseason transfer last year for Coach Brown. He set the school record last Sunday for points and a half, scoring 30 in the first half. in a 41-point win over Central Penn on Sunday. So he's averaging 23.5 in this young season. A lot of expectations at the USCAA Division I level for Bryant and Stratton. Obviously, I have my little bit of a bias towards them and Coach Brown, but DJ Little is a player, man. He can play at any of these schools around here. 6'2" guard. Like I said, he can score, he can defend, he can really defend. And that, I think, is what would be able to put him there. So, like I said, they get Notre Dame of Ohio. They also get Clarion, another Division II school, to wrap up the month. So, a couple good challenges for them coming up. We'll definitely cover Daemen and Bryant Stratton, as well as some of these other schools as they make their way through the season this year.
Yeah, can't wait. And it's going to be fun. Yes, it's going to be a down year for the Big Four hoops community, but there's still plenty of basketball. It's going to be fun watching the development of all these rosters down to the ranks of Daemen, Bryant and Stratton. And you know what? The Uville even has a D2 team now at this point. Yep. So a lot of high quality basketball in Buffalo, and I can't wait to see where it all takes us this season.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we're gonna wrap up. This week's episode of Talking Big Four Hoops. I appreciate everyone that joined in. You know, you can head over to big4hoops.com for coverage this week. We're gonna start getting a lot more posts up there and a lot more coverage as this season rolls on. So I'm Johnathan Snyder. Say thanks to Mike Bundt. Our Twitter handles are below here, as you can see. You can follow Mike at Mike_Bundt. Mike also a reporter for Cover One, the Buffalo Bills. The great site over there, Cover One. Those guys do an excellent job. They host a Going Deep podcast Tuesdays, Mike.
Yep, Tuesdays at 7:00 on the Cover One YouTube channel. Me and Kevin Masseri, and have a lot to talk about this week. So
fortunately we didn't have to talk.
Not so.
Fortunately, we did not have to talk Bills this week. So give Mike a follow. Check out his stuff over at Cover One. You see my Twitter there, big4hoops.com. Thanks for this journey. We'll see you guys next week.